welcome to everyone who is here this Friday morning. Thanks for being here and thanks for listening in. Just so you know, we are recording the session and I will be sharing it later on after it's been edited a little bit. And we planned the conversation to be around 15 minutes. And at the end, you're very welcome to ask questions. We will have like 5 to 10 minutes for a small Q&A. You can leave your questions in the chat during the conversation as well. So if it's related to one of the questions that we're discussing, I will try to monitor the chat as well and ask as we go. But we will have time at the end to answer any questions. And first of all, I will give a little introduction of why we are here. We are here because of Lifestyle and Design Cluster and because of a project called Let's Get Started, where we are organizing these webinars, seminars, knowledge sharing exercises around different topics. And this webinar is organized by Aarhus University, and we are a very big fan of digital fashion. We are working with it a lot, so that's going to be our topic for today. Digital fashion and metaverse. And this webinar builds upon another project that a lot of you, I think, already know, because I've been bombarding you with a lot of emails and invitations. And that's the digital fashion roundtables. And in that project, Jonas and I, who is also going to be here in this conversation today, we are writing a white paper on digital fashion and the metaverse. And we invited 2 of the case companies that will be showcased in the white paper as well, Men and Virtual. And we will have a conversation around digital fashion and the metaverse and trends and possible strategies and all kinds of things today. So firstly, I will introduce myself, and then we will go around, and then the other speakers will also introduce themselves. My name is Kata, and I'm from Aarhus University. I'm a researcher and project manager there, and I'm working mostly with digital fashion, but all kinds of digital projects as well in the lifestyle and design industry. And I've been working with Lifestyle and Design Cluster for a while now, being part and managing some of the digital projects and sustainability related projects as well. So this is kind of my passion project, the digital fashion project, and that's why I'm here. And then maybe Jonas can introduce himself, and then Rebecca and Felix.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the good introduction, Kata. I'm Jonas, and I'm an assistant researcher at the IT University. And in my research, I focus on NFTs and the metaverse, and in this particular case, also digital fashion in the metaverse. My background is I'm an artist by, like, my past was being an artist, and I came into blockchain and NFT and the metaverse through my own artistic practice, and then slowly began also to make research.
Rebecca?
Good morning. So yeah, my name is Rebecca, as Kata said, and thanks for the introduction from both of you. I work at an XR, which stands for extended reality company called MEN, where we work with digital solutions connected to virtual reality and augmented reality. And we work a lot within the fashion industry and try to figure out more about what cases that we can bring in, because we really think that's such an interesting field to work with in XR and connected to, yeah, the metaverse and all these things. So trying to figure out what the opportunities are. And I'm going to be bringing it one of the cases as well that we're working on. So yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, and I'm Felix, one of the co-founders of the startup called Virtual. We turn fashion brands into virtual experiences, so we actually help them to lower the threshold to explore virtual worlds. And we have built a platform that automates a process that helps fashion brands to convert their items into pretty much the skins that users can engage with in these virtual worlds, and to pretty much move these items seamlessly across the different destinations, across the different virtual worlds.
Thank you. So just as a little icebreaker, I would like to bring a small exercise, and that's because Rebecca and I, we were in Korea this year, and we went on a metaverse masterclass with a lot of other brands and tech companies and so on. And we've been listening to so many things and so many presentations about the metaverse, and we got to know so many angles and perspectives and so on. And then a lot of the presentations started with like, oh, everyone already knows what the metaverse is, so let's just keep that. And then we were like, yeah, but what is it? So no one actually defined it. And then when Jonas and I started doing our white paper, we also saw that it's a quite undefined thing or space or whatever we want to call it. So I kind of started asking people what they think the metaverse is. So if you could give your own definition, that would be really nice. I don't know who wants to start, Rebecca or Felix, whichever.
I'm fine with going.
Yeah.
yeah. As you said, we went to South Korea on a metaverse trip, and this question has been asked a lot of times, and I always think it's really, really funny because we don't really know what it is yet, because it's not actually there in a sense. So I think it's also funny to talk about it in this space that we're at now, because there are different like metaverse platforms, and that in a sense doesn't even make sense, because the metaverse is supposed to be like all around us one thing, and we're talking about this distinctive metaverse platforms. But I think what essentially is where we're supposed to see it as is an evolution of the internet. It's a different way that we're going to be experiencing internet of the future. So into a 3D world, entering into a 3D world where everything is more like real time, and you can access it in a different way. So this virtual reality and augmented reality is a way to engage in the metaverse, but it's not the metaverse in itself, if that makes any sense. But yeah, but it's still unclear because we don't know what it is yet, for sure.
Yeah. Felix, any addition or a whole new definition?
Yeah, it's always good to be second, because then the definition is already done. No, I think, I mean, like we actually in all our pitches and all our narrative, we don't talk about the metaverse, we talk about virtual worlds, which is for us easier for people to understand. And it also, like, metaverse always sounds for me like it needs to be this one thing, but it's actually a huge connection of all kinds of things together in an ecosystem. So kind of, we always talk about virtual worlds, or you can also talk about the multiverse. And I think, like, I mean, for us, it's very important when we engage with others that we pretty much say exactly what Rebecca said. Okay, our experience that we have right now on the web in a different space, and pretty much with more immersive opportunities around that. And I think this is what we're looking at. Yeah.
Okay, very good non-definitions. And the reason why I invited the two of you is because you represent two very different companies. And the next question would be why your company got into digital fashion. And it would be nice if you explained a little bit. And for the others, as a background, Men is an XR company that is working with lots of different fields, so not just digital fashion. So it would be nice if you talked a little bit about why you started getting into digital fashion as well. Why do you think it's relevant? And then, of course, Virtual is a platform born because of digital fashion and working with digital fashion. So that's a very different angle again. So just motivation, why do you want to work with digital fashion and the metaverse?
Sure. Would you like to go first, Felix? Or
yeah, I can do that. So it's pretty much two reasons. So the way we got engaged with it, all my co-founders have children, and one of them has three children actually, and they're all Gen Z, and they all play Roblox and different. They're actually engaged in different virtual worlds, and they get very annoyed if they, for example, have to change their avatar, if they don't like the clothing item, the quality of it. So kind of I think there was an emotional connection to it, which was like, okay, when we talk about virtual worlds or the metaverse, a lot of people are like, yeah, but this is not something, I mean, it will come at some point, but it's not really there. But I think it's also because partly you also talk to the wrong generation in these regards. And I think what we can see there is that there are a lot of people who are really engaged in it, and we thought, okay, how can we make this place better and more and lower the threshold pretty much for people to engage with it. And for us, it's very important. We really like this aspect of thinking that we live in two worlds. One is the physical one and one is the virtual one. And I think that what is really interesting for us in the fashion industry is that you have your physical item, but how can you also have this, how can you have a virtual item that can coexist between this physical item? And how can you add extended functionalities around that, for example? And how do you find more people that people can more express themselves? For example, you can have a normal hoodie in the physical life and suddenly have a virtual item which is a hoodie that shoots rainbows, which would not be possible actually in the physical life. And so for us, this was very interesting in looking at what are the opportunities around that, and yeah, how can we engage with that, with this generation that is already in it.
Cool. Yeah, I really like what you're saying as well about this is being a way of expressing ourselves within the virtual worlds. And I definitely agree with that. We, as an XR company, we actually ended up in fashion in a different sense. We started with creating a virtual reality installation with a documentary about the fast fashion industry, which is called X-Ray Fashion back in the day. And so we were interested in trying to figure out how can we engage more with this, because this is one of the flagships of our company, and digitalization. And we started with working with different opportunities within fashion as well, with augmented reality, and then suddenly this metaverse, digitalization, virtual world is coming in, and it just makes sense for an XR company to jump on that. And the reason we're interested in digital fashion is because we have a passion for creative projects, and fashion is such a good mix for us between business and art. And also because, as Felix said, this about expressing yourself in a virtual world is close to us as well, because we're very concerned with creating experiences within virtual reality and augmented reality, and connected to how does this connect to the physical world, and how you engage both physically and digitally. And fashion is such a good intermediate thing, because you want to express yourself through fashion in the real world, and you also want to do that in the digital world. So yeah, I think that's how we gain that interest.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And you already touched upon a little bit of what I want to talk about next, this connection between the physical and digital, because it would be really nice if you talked a little bit about what trends you see. And one that you already talked about is this connection between the physical and digital. And I'm very happy that you brought that up, because it's also something that Jonas and I want to push in the white paper, that's like the physical world and the digital world should work together. So the entering the digital doesn't mean that you leave the physical behind. We kind of want to look at the digital in a way that it is a complement to the physical. So they work in like harmony, hopefully. So that's one trend that a lot of companies that started working with digital, physical, phygital are pushing as well, and that's very, very nice. But could you maybe mention a couple of other things that you see working with different fashion brands and so on that are happening in digital fashion or in the metaverse in general? I don't know who wants to start. Maybe you can start, Rebecca, and then.
Yes, sure. I think what is very interesting at the moment is this. Obviously, everybody seems to know this, that you can try on fashion filters in AR through Snapchat, mainly the main provider of this. We also see trends such as what is it called? It's called DressX, which is a platform where you can put in your images, and then you can have a digital dress, and it's just on an image, but it's still like a way to represent yourself in an image that's kind of different from real life, or the other pictures that you gain from yourself. And there are a lot of different platforms that sell these kind of smaller designers who start to design in 3D instead of like on paper as a sketch and stuff like that. So you can use it in a digital world in a different sense. And I think a lot of the brands that we're talking to as well is very interested in how high digitalization of the fashion industry for them can help them in combating these sustainability problems that there is, which is a huge thing for the fashion industry, and a lot of them are concerned with how can we, for instance, go out and the salespeople, how can they go out to customer meetings, and can they bring in a digital asset instead of bringing a physical asset, which they usually do, because that's really polluting in this industry to bring that. So, but yeah, there are many different trends that we see, both for the customers that we work with, but also for just Gen Z or even like millennials as well, are trying to jump on this, like trying on fashion filters. But I don't know for sure if it's still like mostly a gimmick, but Gen Z is definitely catching on, as Felix said, in a different way for them to express themselves digitally.
Yeah.
Any additions, Felix?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting, like if you look at the fashion industry, like what's going on right now, you have, as Rebecca already said, different trends, for example, sustainability, which are big topics, but also e-commerce, how to optimize that, self-expression, but also this whole social media ecosystem, that it's pretty much like a multi-channel ecosystem of social media channels that you engage with as a brand. And I think if you look at that, it's all about, okay, how do you create the best customer or like the best consumer experience around that? And I think what we have to see is like, it's not disattached digital fashion or the metaverse. It's actually a natural addition to what brands are already doing. And I think this is kind of the interesting part. And this is why fashion brands should also look into it, because you can say, okay, how do I, with the metaverse, how can I extend my e-commerce and optimize that? And how can I create more ways of engaging with my community by being in the metaverse that I am limited right now with, for example, by using Facebook or Instagram. So I think like this is why these are parts that it fits very nicely to the challenges that also the industry is facing. And in some way, of course, it's a new area. And that means it's not like that if a fashion brand has this challenge right now, that if they go into metaverse, it's going to be kind of, it's going to be the holy grail. But we can definitely see that if they slowly explore in that field, that then they can actually find answers to some of the challenges they're facing today.
Okay. And you are representing very different companies. So when it comes to these trends, and also Jonas as well as a digital artist, it would be really nice if you talked a little bit about how or which trends you're facing towards, which trends you as a company will or have already hopped on, and which of these angles can you help the companies with? Yeah. Who wants to start? Maybe Jonas can start as an artist and what it looks like in the metaverse and what trends you see there.
I definitely see a trend going forward using the technology for building up communities and building up a space where you can share common interests. So as an example, in the art metaverse community, there's, for example, a genre called trash art, where a lot of artists, they meet with a common interest in trash art, and they also meet in the metaverse to talk with their collectors. And then there's these gatherings where they put up the works, and this whole community meets and celebrate their specific taste. And that's super interesting, because earlier you would need to meet maybe on a chat room or somewhere else, and now you can meet from all over the world in this virtual environment and celebrate something that you all adore or are interested in.
You also have your own metaverse studio, Jonas. I think that's also quite interesting to walk around in. I will make sure to edit together with the other resources that we will share. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that, how people can visit your gallery. Yeah,
so right now I have a show called String, where I present a collection of paintings I've done since 2015 that all work with the blockchain and NFTs. So it's some kind of history of my idea of the blockchain and NFT development. And that's in a meta world called Voxels. And it's one of the very early NFT meta worlds. Yeah.
Thank you. Who wants to go next?
Okay. So, no, I think like there are definitely interesting trends going on there. So I think when it also comes to customer co-creation, I think we talked about it, is like how can users co-create, or how can consumers co-create with these brands? And I think they're very interesting opportunities. For example, in virtual worlds where there are competitions, there's so much creativity around, and I think this is really a possibility for fashion brands to really tap into that creativity. And so this is the one area with co-creations. Then there's the whole trend, I think, in interoperability, very difficult word to pronounce. I always say it wrong each time. And I think that's very interesting to see, okay, it's not only one world, and we cannot just bet on one world. There will be different worlds. And I think what helps is definitely to engage with all these different worlds, but also not to think of them as a separate part, but actually to rather think of them as an extended social media channel. And that means if it is an extended social media channel, it should be part of your multi-channel strategy of a brand, for example. So you should think of them as, how do you connect also these virtual worlds with these social media channels that you already have? So I think like these are two trends that are there. And what we pretty much do as a platform is we want to create this, first of all, this engagement with virtual clothing at scale. So that means it's possible for brands to really test their virtual item collections, for example, or to really populate collections in a bigger scale, that it should not just be one NFT drop item, but it should actually be collections. So how can a brand actually have all the collections they have in the physical space also in a virtual space? And this is where we help with our platform with automating that process. So pretty much a brand can upload their items and we convert them at scale to that. And maybe second part is this whole, how can you seamlessly move items around? Because the problem right now is that actually each virtual world has different requirements. That means if a brand wants to go into different virtual worlds, it's actually it's a really painful process, because you first have to read how to do it. So I think that this is something that where we as a platform provider, we want to help the way that it simplifies the process. If I have a 3D item for a fashion brand, that theoretically I can move it actually into all kinds of different worlds without needing to think about these requirements all the time, but actually moving them seamlessly around.
Yeah, cool. I was going to say something similar, actually, in the end towards what you were saying, Felix. I think some of the trends, I mean, seeing it from a perspective, as I said before, with the fashion companies, there are trends of what they like to see in that sense. But from an XR perspective as well, one of the most interesting things to look into is figuring out how to navigate between these different platforms and different technologies that you're using, because we also see a lot of in between. We see a lot of working with, for instance, in Clo, which is a design tool, a digital design tool in 3D, trying to figure out how you can make that work within Lens Studio, which is connected to Snapchat, or into Unity, which is a game engine. So that creates these kinds of XR experiences. And I think some of the things that people need to look into and should be more and are more interested in is trying to figure out how do we navigate between all these different technologies, and how do we navigate between the different metaverse platforms as well. So yeah, for sure, co-creation and talking to different brands as well, and trying to figure out how can you guys help each other, and how can you connect. So I think, yeah, that's probably the main point from us as an XR company.
You mentioned, both of you, something very important that originally actually I didn't want to touch upon, but let's do it anyways, because I think it's super interesting, this whole interoperability aspect, because it's a very huge thing, not just in digital fashion, but anywhere you go when it comes to digitalization. I used to work with the smart city projects, and it was also a very big word, and it caused a lot of troubles. And I'm wondering, when you're talking with your customers that are brands in this case, does this scare them, or do they have any idea how difficult this is, or do they think that it's going to be super easy to go from one platform to another platform? How do they handle this challenge? Because it can be challenging, obviously, because at this point a lot of brands don't have in-house talent knowing these things. They go to external companies like you guys, so they don't know a lot about these things. And how do they handle these challenges?
Yeah, if I can go, I think that's such a good question as well, and really relevant for us, because a large part of our job is actually educating the fashion brands on the new technologies and how it actually works. Because, and I understand that like they have no clue how it works most of the time, and that these technologies don't mix well necessarily, and that it's a longer process. And also working with 3D is much heavier than working in 2D information wise. So it takes a longer time for computers to process this kinds of information. So I think especially in terms of the pipeline of a project, like how long it spans for and how long it takes for us to create it, is really, really hard for a fashion industry to understand. That's usually working in a really top tempo. And yeah, it's for sure it's harder to understand because 3D is so much more than 2D in terms of that. Yeah. So for sure it's a challenge. But it's also really interesting to talk to them about it, because you suddenly see it from their perspective, and I understand why they would imagine that it's kind of, when we come out with a camera and we shoot things in 3D, why is that different from shooting something in 2D? They also just come with a camera when they're going on a photo shoot, but why does it take longer for you to process it afterwards? So for sure, it's a really good question, Kata.
Yes, I remember Rebecca and I did a workshop together where we worked with body scanning, clothes, and then VR, and working with fashion companies, and that was quite interesting for me as well. Because I'm not a person who can work with these technologies. I know things about these technologies. So it was a very educational workshop on how difficult this actually can be.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear. Yeah, exactly. And that was really interesting for us as well. And that's some of the things that we work with, trying to educate our clients as well on this, and getting them engaged in what kind of software should they be aware of learning to use and stuff like that. So yeah.
What about you, Felix? Any additions, jumping from platform to platform? How do you see that with the brands?
No, I think, it's definitely a lot of education is needed. I think the biggest problem is it's a bit of a dilemma. In these regards, like fashion brands always want to do everything perfect. So they have built up their brand narrative for a very long time. And they put a lot of hard work into this, and it's something new. And the question is always, okay, starting something new, it has to be perfect, because then, it will not have any negative effects to my brand narrative pretty much. And I think the challenge for fashion brands is that it is an exploratory process. Even if you do everything perfectly and you kind of have the perfect plan, you have the very expensive big PR stunt, it can still not go well. I mean, there are, for example, big brands that did these PR stunts and then actually nothing much happened. So it's all about understanding that pretty much it's an exploratory process, and this exploratory process means that a fashion brand who is going into that space first needs to really find out, okay, which virtual world should I choose, which one fits to me, but also in terms of an expectation setting. I'm now engaging with these communities, but maybe not, and I'm pretty much doing a bit of trial and error here as well. And I think this is kind of something to look at, and this is where we have to educate a lot, but this is where we also have to kind of change the mindset in the beginning, because if you don't change the mindset in the beginning, I don't think that it's a very sustainable way. So it's not a long-term perspective, because otherwise there are enough examples where brands said, hey, I tried it out. It was not the way I wanted to have it, or it was not the way how Gucci Garden was performing. And then suddenly it's like, okay, we might try it again in 3 years. So I think on that regards, like, how do I engage with these communities? And these are different communities that I have before. So this is a huge challenge that they have to also get used to. And I think what also Rebecca talked about, this whole 3D items, it is a 3D item for me is an interpretation of a physical item, but it can never replicate a physical item. And this is even a stronger case if you go into virtual worlds. It's a gameable interpretation of a physical item, which even expands more. So I think this is something where fashion brands need to change the mindset in order to really embrace these virtual worlds. And I think this is a huge challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point. And I think that's what a lot of brands don't get yet, that when you enter, it's very much going to be a testing phase, and there will be a lot of ways that you have to look into it, and some of it will fail because it will not be fit for your company. But it's of course it comes with financial investments as well, and it can be a little bit scary, but it is such a nice opportunity to experiment and get to know what works for your brand. So that's a good learning to take home, I think. Now we talked about things a little bit more fluffy things, and it would be really, really nice if the two of you could give us a concrete case based on all of what we've talked about before, and it would be nice to walk through a case and then relate to these things that we talked about before. Yeah, Felix, do you want to start?
Yes, I can do that. So one case we worked together was a Swedish high-end ready-to-manufacture brand, so also having the sustainability aspect in mind. And for them, it was pretty much their challenge was that they wanted to look at find more ways in how to engage with the community, but in terms of diversify the community they have, but also actually bringing more creative content towards their current community. So I think these two regards. And they also look for a platform where you can explore different patterns and pretty much explore different collections. And yeah, so we collaborate together with them, and this was their challenge. And what we were looking at, okay, first of all, the first step, it was a bit, okay, what is your brand narrative right now, and what virtual worlds are out there, and how would these virtual worlds coexist with your brand narrative that you have right now? So it's, again, that it's not disruptive to whatever they've been doing before. And then what we did was we looked at the virtual world Zepeto. I'm not sure if you know about it. I mean, you have been to South Korea, so I think you heard a lot about it. So it's a big virtual world, over 300 million users, and it's pretty much a place where people users can create their own avatars, buy fashion items, actually also create their own fashion items, and create worlds, play games, pretty much engage on a totally different level. And this one Swedish brand that I'm talking about, they pretty much took the whole collection into the virtual world Zepeto, and then created a place for that to pretty much engage with the community there, and engage with the community in terms of competitions, but also doing joint video projects and all kinds of different content that you can pretty much do there. So this was the engagement they had in the world Zepeto. And then what was interesting is it's not only about activating a community in another virtual world, learning about that, but it's also about taking the content and this engagement that you have there into your existing social media channels. And this is then what they did with, for example, showing more of the videos from Zepeto, more of the templates, and also showed more the phygital aspect of it. So also showed, okay, you have a physical model. How is the scalable interpretation of this physical model looking in Zepeto? And what helped there a lot was they were, for example, experimenting with different patterns as well. If you want to make a physical photo shoot, it's very expensive to also do this. And you actually have to create also the physical product to make the photo shoot. But there, for example, they could just say, okay, let's change the pattern on the dress that we had before. Let's make a video out of it. With Zepeto, it only takes a few seconds. And suddenly you have an amazing video with a totally new fashion item that you can explore and test with your community. And so in these two regards, it helps them a lot by increasing, pretty much diversify their customer base, and also increasing engagement on their traditional social media channels, but then also to find a way on actually getting new customer insights and understanding, okay, how would this one pattern look like? How would another pattern look like? And really kind of enjoy the benefits that virtual fashion can have for them.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah. So I will elaborate on the case as well, which is very, very different in that sense. It's from 2021, where we were working with Via Design and Business in Herning to create a different way of showcasing the different designs from 15 of their students during Corona. So instead of having actually to be able to see it and come and feel it at the school, you could portray it through AR And what we did was I'm trying to explain it and I'm trying to figure out how to explain it in a way that's not too technical. But we work with a technology that's called photogrammetry. This means that we go out and you can scan in a way physical items, and then you can turn them into 3D models. And you do this by taking pictures of the physical items all around, putting it into 3D software and like figuring it out, and then you can portray it. In the end, if you go long enough, you can portray it through AR. And what we did, we went out and we took pictures of the 15 designs on the models, and then we created these 3D figures that you can then place through an app in your living room. The app is called Sustain AR. You can actually just find it yourself in App Store on your mobile device, and it's free, so you can, if you want to see what it actually looks like. And it was such a great way to what works really well with photogrammetry, instead of creating something just merely in 3D and animating it in that sense, is that you get a really, really high detail of the fabric and of the shape that it's fitting, the way that it's fitting on the model. So you're getting a lot more information that's real from the real world when you try to see it through photogrammetry in that sense. And you can take your phone or whatever, and you could walk around it. You can see it from every angle. You could go really, really close to the fabrics and kind of get a feel of it, even though you can't really touch it. And we created this before as well for different companies through WebXR, which means that you can access it through like QR codes and you can see it on a website. But this, when it was app-based, we created the entire app, and you could see the different designs connected to different universes. And when you click on each of the on the models that you portray through AR, then you can hear the story of the designers thinking about what was their connections to creating this piece of clothing and this design in it specific. So that's a different way of working, not like metaverse way specifically, but connected to the real world and the virtual world in that sense, which was really, really beneficial for us. And it helped them a lot as well to engage with each other, even though they had to be online. So that was a really cool case as well.
I recommend you download the app. It's free, and it's really fun to play with, and it's kind of a nice way of learning how this works. So it's, if you have a phone, and I'm sure you have, download it because it's really fun.
Yeah, and Kata just wrote the name in the comments as well. So take a look at it. Super,
very easy to find.
Yeah.
Felix, in your case example, you already touched upon a little bit about customers, and when Jonas and I were doing our research, we also noticed that it's really, really difficult to get to the customers, and who they are, we don't really know yet, because we are very much in the testing phase. A lot of the companies are in the testing phase, so they don't really know what they're doing and who they're doing it for, and they don't always have the time and the resources to really look into who engaged with their digital products and digital platforms and so on. And it would be really nice if you have any examples or knowledge about the customers and who they are, because it's clear that it's not always just your regular fashion customers. It's new customers. You already mentioned it, Felix, that the Swedish brand, I mean, being on Zepeto, that's a whole new customer segment that they didn't engage with before, most probably. But then bringing this content back to their regular customers, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how, if you know anything about the engagement and how it was on Zepeto and how it was on like regular social media channels that we are more familiar with, and how these different customer segments engage with this content.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Like when I first started working with Zepeto, I was also quite surprised on what kind of content is popular there, how people engage there. I think it's I think for my generation, it is quite surprising on how what formats can be very popular there. So I think it's quite interesting to look at, okay, how are the users and how are they engaging there? And I think what we can see is, of course, they are, for example, Zapato, they're around from 12 to 28 years old, mainly 70% female. So this is like typical demographics that we're looking at. But I think what we can definitely see that they're more engaged. And I think they're more engaged in wanting to participate and shape their surrounding. And I think what they definitely don't want to have is they don't want to have brands pushing advertisement on them. So I think actually they don't necessarily like brands. I think the only way they like brands if a brand is not there in representing themselves as a brand, but actually representing themselves as a kind of as a bundle of different creators all together. And I think if a brand is in such a virtual world, then it should show that they're not there to push items on them, like on the users, but they're actually there to engage, and they're curious and actually engaging in different creative formats with these users. And I think this is very important. I think also an important learning with the Swedish brand that I was talking about. It was like, okay, how to engage with these users and what works and what doesn't work. And it's also not like if you do one thing that maybe they don't really like, that they're like saying, oh, you know, now we don't want to talk to you anymore. It's rather that they also know it's kind of also an exploratory process for you. And I think as long as you're kind of engaged and you really try to understand them and not push something on them, I think then it's definitely something where you can also be successful as a fashion brand. And so this is more on the virtual world side. Now, if we take content from the virtual worlds into the traditional social media channels, then it also becomes interesting because, of course, avatars and so on, they have a bit more of a playful edge as well. And I think what we can see is, of course, the fashion industry is also a bit more conservative in trying new formats. And I totally understand that if they have built up a community, that they have to find a way on how to introduce it that it's not disruptive to what they have been doing before. And what we can also see is, I mean, for example, TikTok was not popular or like no one really knew about it a few years ago, but suddenly it's actually a format that is more playful and a lot of people are using it right now. And I think what we can learn from that is maybe in the future, there is more of a gamification around things and more of a playful way. So I think this is something where you can also take this content from these social media, from the virtual worlds into your social media channel and pretty much extend your social media strategy with that and say, you know, we also use content from virtual worlds. And this is kind of our very, very playful gameable side, for example. And I think that works very well with on these two levels, engaging with new users, but also actually finding a way on bringing your existing users towards this mindset of the virtual worlds.
Very, very interesting insight, actually. That's super useful. Any additions, Rebecca? Anything, any observations from your side when it comes to customers and how they're different from our usual suspects?
I think Felix said it so well. I mean, in general, there was a lot of really great insights here. I don't see like, because we're not working, basically mostly working B2B. And I think what is interesting is, as Felix already mentioned before, is that they're trying to engage in this virtual world and trying to figure out, as fashion brands mainly, trying to figure out how do we navigate in this. And a lot of the people are, as you said before, Felix, like trying to jump on this and seeing what it can actually do. But I think what they should be focusing more on is what kind of impact will it have for them? How do they want to portray their own? Like we are very engaged as well with trying to create like storytelling and creating experiences. That's what we mainly work with. So thinking about what can we gain from this? And I think a lot of the people are at the moment just interested in testing it, and I think that's a good thing. But keeping up with it, even though it might fail the first time, as Felix said earlier, I think it's a good idea to just keep being engaged, keep trying new things, and then through that trying to figure out what is it that we want to do with this. But I just see brands being curious about it mainly, but not having thought specifically much about what are the costs and where do we want to portray it and what is the purpose in essence. So, but yeah, I think it's most of the things that Felix said was really, really spot on. So not much to add.
It's we are always circling around this sentence that this is an experimental space, and I think that's very, very good for the companies as well, kind of refreshing that they can just have a little bit of fun. But it's also important what we talked about before, that this whole introduction of the digital world, it's not just a copy paste of the physical world, not just like repeating things and also not repeating mistakes. And I think it's also important to talk about the mistakes of the physical world and how that could be avoided in the digital world. So just throwing in a couple of buzzwords that I think are very important to talk about, like sustainability, responsibility, accessibility, inclusivity. What do you think about these words in the digital? Because these are very, very important things to look at in the fashion industry in general. And I would like to think, or I hope, I don't know how to say it, but I hope we will be much better in the digital world when it comes to these aspects. And could you maybe talk a little bit about how do you think the digital can help with these things?
Yeah, sure. I think, well, it's clear for us that they can help in many different ways, and I think, and that's based on the big art installation that we have with X-Ray Fashion, which is a really informative documentary in VR as well, where you can experience the supply chain of the fashion industry in a different way, and you will also get engaged, because virtual reality is the medium for it's the ultimate empathy machine, just so to say. So you can really gain insights into that. And the fashion industry is a very, very polluting industry. So thinking about sustainability is something that everybody is going through. And how we can use the digitalization is still a big question, because there isn't enough content right out there to figure out if it's actually making such a big difference. But as I said earlier as well, I think one of the things that we're interested in concerning sustainability is definitely whether or not the digitalization or try-on fashion filters can help, first of all, in-house, like in the supply chain, for instance, to reduce sample sizes. So you don't have to bring that out on customer meetings, but you can bring out virtual assets either through photogrammetry, as we're working with, or as try-on fashion filters. There's also, I think it's a 010, which is a big digital fashion site as well, working with AR try-on fashion filters. They had this idea of putting up, like on bus stops, that might be what the future looks like, having, instead of having like posters of the clothes from when you're advertising your own content, you can have a screen where you can try on the clothes yourself while you're waiting for the bus, which I think is super interesting. Concerning responsibility and accessibility, I think that is some of the things as well. Like making it accessible in the real world could be one of the things, like what 010 is doing, having these, or thinking about putting it out there in the real world, like connecting the physical and the virtual world in that sense is definitely making it more accessible. But also, as Felix is working with in the virtual world, it's going to be more pronounced with the Gen Z, and they're growing older as well. So it will become more accessible through the new devices that are going to be developed, and we'll have to wait and see for that. Concerning the responsibility, it's definitely something to consider. What is the purpose of this? Especially, for instance, with X-Ray Fashion, we're focusing not merely on the supply chain, but also knowing that the workers in India are working under really, really hard conditions, or in Bangladesh, or where you are, and putting a focus on that. And most of all, I think what we need to do more in general when we're talking about the metaverse is focusing on the ethics, not merely in the fashion industry, but trying to figure out what is actually ethical, not just for the workers in the supply chain, but for everyone. Because there are a lot of things that when the internet was evolving, we didn't have GDPR at the time, and that was some of the things you should have thought about earlier. So keeping up, thinking about what kind of ethics are there when you're starting to engage in the metaverse. What should you think about concerning information processing and all these kinds of things? And also, when we're working with the both physical and digital aspects, what can happen to people's minds when you start thinking about both physical and virtual, and connecting them in a virtual world? Is that healthy, and all these things? So there's a lot of research that needs to be done still, but considering aspects, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, very good points. Any additions, Felix?
I think Rebecca gave so many good examples already. I think in these regards, I mean, also when I talk to brands or different stakeholders, actually, there's always, of course, also criticism involved in looking at virtual worlds. And I think what's important is kind of to look at a balance here. So, for example, the one thing is, if we talk about responsibility, what if a young generation is spending most of their time in virtual worlds? Should they not spend their time in the physical world? So this is kind of an argument that is, of course, coming up a lot of times. And I think it is quite a relevant argument. However, it's like a bit with, I think like there are different aspects about it. So one thing is, right now what we are seeing is it's pretty much an extension of how I, for example, as a kid, I was also playing computer games. So kind of it was actually a natural step to actually spend quite some of my time in the digital space. And we are nowadays also doing that. So I think we are actually spending quite a lot of time on the internet. What if the internet in the future is actually the metaverse? And then you have to think of, okay, well, I spend this time there, but maybe it's not such a big difference because I actually, it's pretty much a similar time spent, you could say. And then, of course, the question is always a bit, how can you regulate this amount of time, for example, that is spent there? But I think then you can find really interesting formats around that. But I think on the other side, what is really interesting is that it really supports this whole creator economy. Like now, suddenly, a child in high school can actually create these games and these worlds in Roblox where there was no possibility before. So I think it's like also, it's giving the next generation such a boost in creativity if they want to engage with this content. And I think this is something very interesting to look at, like, how can you, I think in the future, there will be a different relationship between users and brands. And I think users will become more and more designers as well. And they will bring in their creativity also into the brands. So there will be more co-creation. And I think this is an extremely interesting aspect if we talk about accessibility, inclusivity, but also responsibility. I think these are all kind of merging together. And I think there's a very big potential in that. And and just on a last note with the sustainability aspect, for me, it's a bit like you have different steps in the fashion industry. Right now, the big step is actually adopting through 3D technology, which I think is a door opener for the whole sustainability topic. But what I rather see is that the problem is that a lot of times there are not enough use cases for brands to adapt to 3D technology. And so for me, virtual worlds right now can help a lot actually for brands to say, hey, you have another use case here. If you have 3D items, it's much easier to create skins, for example, for virtual worlds. So there's a big opportunity for fashion brands also there to actually do the next step that is important for sustainability, adopting to 3D technology with having virtual worlds in the back of your head.
Okay. Very, very, very good points. And I really like that you're also thinking about these words, because often they get forgotten and they shouldn't. So it's really nice to see that it's definitely a thing to include in your strategy when you're entering the digital world. And I don't know if anyone has any questions, please leave it in the chat. But as kind of slowly closing the session and speaking about strategies, I would like to ask the both of you to give maybe 3-4 advice to brands on how to start their digital journey, or how to build their strategies. What are the important things to consider and think about? Yeah, Felix, maybe you can start this time.
Yeah, looking at the time, I'll make it very short.
It's okay if you go over a couple of minutes, so don't worry.
I mean, 3 points. I think the one thing is about what I talked about earlier, the digital brand narrative. Thinking about, I think this is the first starting point. Okay, there are different destinations, and that means there are different ways on how to engage with communities and how to show your brand that you have done earlier. And I think this is important to pretty much look at the one side of your brand. How is my brand narrative right now? And how can this brand narrative be in the virtual worlds? And how will it be different as well? And then based on that, to also select the virtual world that you want to start with pretty much. So this whole education part is coming in. They're always happy to ask us about education. And this is the first part. And the second part is to understand from the mindset, okay, again, I have so many more possibilities with physical clothing. So maybe to not even think about just replicating your physical collection, but also think about what limitations do I currently have in the physical world, and how can I actually go beyond these limitations in the virtual world? So to do, when you go in these virtual worlds, to do collections that are actually expanding the reality that you have right now. Or for example, just testing collections. You don't even need to have collection of your physical items. And then the third part is pretty much engaging with these communities that we talked about before. Testing with these communities and to already say, okay, we are going to do, for example, 5 different formats on how we engage with them. And we're actually making a learning experience out of it. What worked well, how can we improve it the next time, so that you have this trial and error process behind it. So I think these 3 parts, brand narrative, then looking beyond pretty much your normal clothing collection, what you can do, and these community formats. I think these are the 3 parts they can engage with.
Very good advice.
Yeah.
Any additions, Rebecca?
Yeah, I think Felix said it really, really well. I think some of the things that we're also seeing is that a lot of brands are still not like working in 3D when they're designing clothes. I think going into actually just thinking in a digital world when you're starting the design process, learn to design in Clo 3D or a similar software where you do designs in 3D for clothes, and test as well. Like go out and don't be afraid to test and figure out what works for you and what would you like to do with it. And yeah, based on this, as well as we said before, there isn't actually, usually we see that brands don't put into in the budget that they want to include this 3D aspect or representation in the digital world. And I think starting to think about actually including it, even though you don't know what it might like be and how it might feel, and it's really hard to sell something when you don't know what it's going to look like. I think take a leap and try to engage in the digital world, see what it feels like and figure it out. And then as Felix said, for sure, just try to think of the opportunities, think about the different platforms, maybe just try them out and engage in them and see if what your brand, how your brand could be represented in virtual worlds or in any way in 3D via AR or virtual reality as well. So yeah.
Cool. Very, very good advice. Also, I mean, we are running out of time, but we started a little bit late. So to end the conversation, kind of a future-facing fluffy question. I know that Felix is not a big fan of it, but he will have to answer anyways. Just to close what we've been talking about, I would like to ask you, and maybe Jonas as well, how do you see the metaverse evolving? How do you think it will look like in, I don't know, 5 years' time? And maybe also mentioning your hopes for the space. It would be nice to hear your opinions about this. I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Felix, just to get it out of the way.
No, I think what I hope is, so if we can replicate the quality that we have right now in computer games, for example, and bringing this usability into virtual worlds, then I think we have done a huge step. Because right now, most of the graphics are not that good yet. I think it's, so there's a so there's a difference of what we're used to in terms of graphic and usability than what is offered in the virtual worlds. And I think it will, if a huge hope would be that actually this we would progress in these regards, because if we would progress, it would mean it would become a more natural part of us. And that would also mean if it progresses in these regards, it will take over more and more services that we have in the normal web right now. And I think which will actually help us in terms of usability a lot. So this is kind of my big hope, that in terms of usability and different services around that, we're actually going to make a huge leap forward.
Okay, good things, I think, to hope for.
Yeah, well said, Felix. I think I definitely agree. And I think what I'm hoping for as well is this interconnectedness, because we're not going to get rid of our or mixed reality more as well, if you can call it. We're not going to get rid of our physical body or physical world anytime soon. So trying to engage in a like the new technologies are trying to become more a part of the physical world as well. Like I mentioned with 010 that had an idea of putting posters up that was screens so you can try on virtual fashion, digital fashion assets. But definitely, as Felix mentions as well, we are waiting to see what the technology is going to bring, because at the moment the information is so heavy, and that's why when you're entering into a metaverse platform, you're seeing these kind of small characters and they're animated instead of looking like real people. In a sense, they're avatars that represent something. And I've in experiencing with this as well, I'm hoping that it's going to be something that we either learn to connect more with. I think the Gen Z is definitely doing a better job than I am, or that the technology is simply evolving so that we can get a lot of information down to smaller spaces. And that's definitely going to come, but when, I'm not so sure. But that's for sure my hope as well, that we're going to see an involvement where we connect the virtual world with the physical world in more devices, and so that we're not just merely disappearing into virtual world. I don't think that's gonna happen anytime soon. So it's interesting to see where it's gonna head, but that's my hope for sure.
Jonas, any hopes for the future?
Yeah, I hope, and I see also a tendency that metaverses might become these huge synthetic worlds that might be more fun, or at least as fun as the real world. And hopefully they will be governed by a large group of peoples and not corporations like Facebook and those we know today. So it will be more democratized, and people will be able to share and create together. Yeah, so that's at least my hopes for the future of the metaverse.
I think that's a very positive way of ending the session. Hopefully all of our hopes will become reality. Let's see, maybe we can have this conversation in 5 years' time and see what happens. But thanks so much, Jonas, Rebecca, Felix, for being here. It was a very, very good conversation, and thanks for our audience as well for being here on an early Friday morning.